Good afternoon and welcome to today's Stormwater Webcast entitled Municipal Stormwater Compliance. This webcast is sponsored by EPA's Office of Wastewater Management. I'm Nico Singela, Senior Program Analyst with EPA's NPDES Stormwater Program, and I've been with the Stormwater Program for the last 6 years, and as many of you know, work on many projects aimed at helping Phase 2 communities implement this challenging program. Today I'm your moderator, so thank you all for joining us. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items to discuss. First, the materials in this webcast have been reviewed by EPA staff for technical accuracy. However, the views of the speakers and the speakers' organizations are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of EPA. Mention of any commercial enterprise product or publication does not mean that EPA endorses them. Today we will have several questions and answer sessions during the webcast. To answer questions, simply type your question into the text box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Then click on the Submit Question button. You don't need to wait until the question and answer periods to submit your questions. In fact, we encourage you to submit your questions early. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. However, due to the high number of participants today, all questions may not be answered. Today's speaker's contact information is provided on your screen should you have additional questions that you wish to ask them following today's webcast. To alert us to any technical difficulties you may encounter during the webcast, you can click on the Help button to obtain a phone number and an email address to receive technical support from our contractor ON24. You may also use the Ask a Question area to post any technical issues you are experiencing. Please include a telephone number where you can be reached, and we will help you troubleshoot your problem. There will also be several occasions today when our presenters will ask you questions. The presenters will post questions in the slide window. Please submit your answers in that same slide window and not in the Ask a Question box, and we'll go over that as we go through today's webcast. At the end of the webcast, you will be asked to complete an evaluation survey. The survey will appear in a pop-up window, so please take a moment right now and turn your pop-up blocker off at this time. Finally, this webcast will be archived indefinitely, so you can access it after today's live presentation. The archived webcast will be posted within 2 weeks on this same website. I think we're ready to kick off today's session. Today's speakers are Jenny Malloy, John Cosco, Jason Papakazma, and John Tinger. Jenny Malloy is with EPA's Office of Wastewater Management. She spent many years at the federal and state levels working on non-point source, stormwater, TMDLs, and other water quality programs. Our second speaker is John Cosco, who is a principal engineer with Tetra Tech in Fairfax, Virginia. John is a registered professional engineer, a certified professional erosion and sediment control. He's the primary author of EPA's MS4 program evaluation guidance that we'll be discussing today, and leads a team that has conducted on-site evaluations of over 130 stormwater programs. Prior to joining Tetra Tech, John worked at EPA for 9 years, where he was one of the co-authors of the Stormwater Phase 2 rule. Our third speaker, Jason Papakazma, has been a watershed planner for Arlington County's Department of Environmental Services since 1999. Jason develops and manages watershed management policies, programs, and projects, including managing Arlington County's MS4 program. He also has been working on the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance, policies, regulation, and guidance for the county. Jason also works with developers and reviews plans for compliance with the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance and works with citizens on a variety of watershed issues. Our last speaker, John Tinger, will end our presentation today. John is a permit writer and a national instructor for EPA's NPDES Permit Writers course. He's with EPA's Region 9 office in San Francisco. John previously was project manager for writing industrial effluent limitation guidelines at EPA headquarters. John has been the EPA lead on a number of MS4 evaluations and has been on the work group that developed the MS4 Program Evaluation Guide that we'll discuss today. We have an excellent presentation today, so let's get started. I'll now turn over the microphone to Jenny Malloy. Good afternoon, Jenny.
Thank you, Nikos. Welcome, everybody, to our webcast on evaluating municipal stormwater programs. The topics for today's webcast are really to start out with an overview of doing an MS4 evaluation, as well as talk a little bit about our new MS4 program evaluation guide that has just recently been put up on our website. We'll talk about MS4 evaluations in general, how to prepare for one, the process, reporting, and follow-up. We'll give an example of an MS4 evaluation of a component of an actual MS4 program, and this will be evaluating the construction component of an MS4 program. We will have Jason talk about his perspective of being the representative of regulated MS4 and his experience of going through an evaluation. And then lastly, John Tinger will talk about how Region 9 uses MS4 evaluations to improve programs. The purpose of an MS4 evaluation can be multifold. There are a lot of different reasons you might actually do an evaluation. You might want to determine compliance status. You might want to assist with permit issuance or renewal. You might actually want to take a look at the program, the stormwater management program, and help identify areas that need improvement. You might specifically want to just assess specific pollutants of concern, maybe in association with developing a TMDL or a TMDL implementation plan. Or the purpose may just simply be to provide technical assistance. The benefits of evaluation are also very multifold. Again, just assessing compliance with the permit or stormwater management plan provisions, strengthening the working relationships between permitting authorities and permittees, and I certainly would like to not underscore, I do want to underscore the importance of that. That's really actually very important, as well as these next two issues about clarifying expectations and permit requirements and clarifying program elements in the management program. It also helps improve permitting authority knowledge of the permittee's operations, priorities, constraints, and challenges, which helps very much in just trying to figure out what the expectations should be in a program. Other benefits actually are to improve the stormwater management program. I would say, in fact, that's probably the primary benefit of doing an evaluation, having a thorough discussion of what the program looks like in order to fix it in ways that give better water quality outcomes, assist with execution of enforcement actions, and lastly, identify strengths and weaknesses of permits. These are reissued every 5 years, and the iterative process associated with the stormwater program really means that every permit should be tightening up a little bit and make a lot more sense in terms of what permittees need to implement. The goals for EPA with an MS4 evaluation are also multifold, but I think it's a little simpler. We really just want to know how effective these programs are being. We want to understand basically what activities are being performed as part of stormwater management programs and what really works. And we want to be able to identify where additional guidance or technical resources are needed. We are obligated statutorily, as part of the Phase 2 rule, to review the program after the first 2 permit terms come to an end. And in order to do that, we really need to know how things are working out there. Now, we were hearing a lot from folks, especially from state permitting authorities, I think, as Phase 2 came along and we went from just under 1,000 MS4s to up to around 7,000, that this was a little overwhelming. And if you're going to have a program like this, you want to be able to go out and figure out if it's working very well. So in response to a lot of those expressed concerns, we decided to develop an evaluation guide, a sort of a manual that the permitting programs could use to go out and evaluate MS4s. And so we have the new guidance out. And the purpose of this is really pretty much the same as the purposes we just talked about for doing an evaluation, to begin with. Really, it's to assess compliance and effectiveness of MS4 programs. And we have written this guide so that it should be effective for both Phase 1 and Phase 2 programs. To help further develop MS4 Phase 2 programs, because most of these are still in the first permit term in the very early stages of developing a program. also to assess pollutants of concern and also to provide technical assistance. We want to make sure that it's really clear, though, that this guide, while we think it's a very helpful tool and really explains the full process of how you could do an evaluation, in some ways it still needs to be customized. If you're going to do an evaluation, especially if it's a compliance evaluation, it's really going to be based very much on what's actually in the permit. So every permit's different, and while I think this guide will be very useful, you still need to make sure that you take a look at what's in the permit.
Yeah, Jenny, I would second that definitely. The guide is not intended to be something you just read the questions off. You really need to customize this to the issues of that stormwater management program, the permit issues, and really look at the guide as kind of suggested questions. The questions really meant to change on the fly as you do the evaluation.
Thanks, John. We did, as part of the process of developing this guide, actually assemble a co-regulator group that involved several state program folks. It involved people at EPA and regions and at headquarters. It involved people on the permit writing side of the house, as well as people who actually do inspections and compliance and enforcement. And a lot of what's in this guide are the things that they suggested that they really thought would be helpful. We got lots of comments from those particular people about the need for this and what should go in it to make it most useful. The intended audience really is for those state and EPA staff that are responsible for NPDES permits, and especially the ones who have to go out and do those inspections. But we also think that it can be a useful tool for MS4 permittees. It doesn't hurt to have this and take a look at what your state or federal regulators might be expecting when they come looking at your program, or even what we think might be the components of a pretty solid MS4 program. Understand, again, it's just guidance, and your program might have somewhat different priorities, and of course your permit is always the thing you need to take a look at if you actually want to know specifically what you're required to do. The guidance actually includes checklists and worksheets for ease of use during evaluations. Again, you don't necessarily have to use them, but we heard from a lot of people that they thought this would be a useful component of a guidance. We did make it what we thought would be a flexible format, because we understand every state program has its own unique sets of components and provisions based on state rules and policies and things like that. So we are making this available in Word with really simple formatting for any state program that wants to just pick this up and edit it to meet their needs, so that you then have all of the provisions or all of the guidance that an inspector or someone else might use to go out and take a look at a program. Edit the heck out of this if you want to, and put in the things you think are important. Just a summary of what's in the guidance. There's a background section that goes a little bit over the history of the regs and the basic requirements. Also a section how you would prepare for an evaluation, the sorts of documents you would review, and how you would contact the MS4 and prepare for that. It talks about the different types of evaluations you might want to do and how you would prepare for both of those, screening level and a detailed level evaluation. And it also talks a lot about follow-up activities. It's very important after you conduct the evaluation that you put together the right reports, that you provide feedback to the MS4, and take care of whatever else needs to be done to make sure that any deficiencies in the programs are fixed. And then the last part of the summary, as noted before, are the sets of worksheets. So the first section is about preparing for an evaluation. First of all, you actually have to decide who it is that you want to go out and perform an evaluation on, which programs. And so this really discusses the different sorts of criteria you might want to consider. Do you want to look at large MS4s or small? Do you want to look at a principal permittee versus perhaps co-permittees? Do you want to just focus on the ones you think are having problems? Do you want to do a comprehensive evaluation that considers all program components, or do you really just want to look at specific program components? There are all of these decisions you have to make prior to actually preparing for the evaluation, and we try to discuss those issues and give you some criteria for how to make those decisions. Then next comes all the logistical issues that come along with scheduling an evaluation, and then reviewing all the documentation prior to the evaluation, and lastly, reviewing annual reports. The two types of evaluations as noted are screening level evaluations and detailed evaluations. And a screening level evaluation, as the name implies, is really just to conduct a really quick assessment of compliance, perhaps, at a very scratch-the-surface level. And it might just be a few hours or maybe up to a full day. It should help identify major strengths and weaknesses of the program. And the guidance goes through screening level procedures as well as screening level questions and what sort of follow-up you would do. If you actually want to do a detailed evaluation, in the guide there are a lot of suggested step-by-step processes for performing an on-site comprehensive program evaluation. It includes a detailed list of topics and questions for each stormwater program area, and it can and should be tailored to individual permittee organizations and particular permit requirements. Remember, every permit's different, or at least from state to state, every permit's different, and you absolutely need to make sure that you cover off the provisions that are articulated in the permit.
Jenny, let me just add on the detailed evaluations. Even when you're spending several days with an MS4, you're typically not collecting the real detailed information to probably do an enforcement action. So we're not talking about looking at hundreds of case files or inspection reports or anything like that. If that's the level of information you need, you probably need to schedule a lot more time. When we talk about a detailed evaluation, we're talking about several days and going through the program in the depth you can in that time.
I think that's a really good point to make. This document is not intended to be an enforcement document. EPA and every state has their own sets of enforcement procedures and guidelines, and while the information you gather in an evaluation can certainly be used to build an enforcement case if that's what your goal is, this is definitely not an enforcement document. Okay, the next step after you actually have undertaken the evaluation is the follow-up. And one thing we actually have heard from lots of people who have permits is that the state or EPA comes in and does the inspection and finds issues, and they might have some very nice discussions during the evaluation or during the audit process, but then a long time goes by before they actually get any specific feedback in writing on what they're supposed to do. And we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. If the goal here is to make sure that we improve programs to get better water quality, and it really is, that really is the goal, then we need to make sure that programs get timely and accurate feedback. So these follow-up activities are really important. This goes through documenting the findings, documenting whether they are actually potential permit violations or just program deficiencies that you would like to see improvements in, the recommendations, documenting what's really effective about a program. The strengths are just as important as the weaknesses, how you prepare the report, and how you can actually use photographs in your report. And then finally, the last section of the guidance includes all of the worksheets. The interview questions in a write-in format, in-field checklist to evaluate a permittee's inspections and inspectors, and an annual report review form that also is in a checklist format. So that's the really brief overview of what's in the guide, and I'm going to turn it back to Nikos.
Okay, and thank you, Jenny. Now we have the first poll question, and in this poll question we're just going to kind of get you oriented. If you've attended our webcast before, you know how to do this. But today we're going to ask how many people are participating in the webcast at your location. We know many of you are in conference rooms sharing one computer line, and we'd like to get a better handle on who's out there. So if you would click on the radio button next to the answer, just right there, and don't type your answer into that lower question box because we won't be able to tabulate it, but just select either just me, 2 to 5, 6 to 10, 10 to 20, or more than 20. I'll give you just a couple seconds to click on that radio button and then click the Submit Answer button at the bottom of your page. And then we'll take a look and see what the results are here. As we're looking at that, also keep in mind that if you are having any technical issues, you can use the Help button at the bottom, and there's a phone number and an email there to get some assistance. So let's take a look and see what people responded here. As we sort of figured, most people are by themselves in their cubes. We all work in cubes, and I'm sure many of you do too. So we've got 66% sitting in cubes probably by themselves. But we have a big chunk, 30% of folks who are in small groups, and then some other numbers there, as you can see. So that kind of gives you a little orientation to how these poll questions work. And we've got another one for you here. The next one, I'm going to ask you one more question. So in this one, we'd like to know who you represent. Are you with a local government, state or federal government? Are you a consultant that assists municipalities? Are you with some industry or some other group, maybe an academic or researcher attending this webcast? So again, just select the radio button that best fits your group, and we'll take a look at those results in just a second here.
Because while people are selecting their choices, we just want to remind people that on EPA's Stormwater website, we have a lot of information, including case studies and the menu of BMPs to really help you develop an effective program.
Yeah.
So those can be effective tools if you identify deficiencies or issues during an MS4 evaluation.
Absolutely. Okay, and we've got the results up here. About 50% are local government folks, which is our target audience, and also today really good representation from state and federal governments, and I imagine that's mostly state folks. And we know that consultants often help municipalities, and we've got about 17% of those folks here as well. So good representation for the audience that we're after in today's webcast. So now we're going to continue on, and I believe John is next in our lineup of speakers today. So I will turn it over to John.
Great. Thanks a lot, Nikos. And the next topic on the webcast schedule is talking about a little bit more of the detail of the guide in terms of preparation, process, reporting, and follow-up. So what we want to do with this part of the presentation is we're going to talk about the three main components of doing the evaluation: the advanced preparation, actually conducting the evaluation, and then the post-evaluation activities. So in terms of advanced preparation, a lot of these slides are targeted more for the regulatory agency. So if you're doing a self-evaluation, some of these don't necessarily apply. But there's basically 4 steps in doing this. And the first step is basically selecting the permittee. So as Jenny mentioned, there's a couple of factors you want to consider. Obviously, if there's just a single permittee you're focused on, there's not going to be any choice there. But there's a lot of programs where you have multiple co-permittees. How do you choose which one? Do you want to look at Phase 1 or a Phase 2 program? Do you want to possibly look at a non-traditional program like a water district or DOT or school or something else like that? Other issues to consider, do you want to look at the largest MS4? Sometimes we suggest actually focusing on kind of the biggest or the principal permittee first. Do you want to look at a MS4 that has recently been permitted? Or one that has, pressing water quality concerns, maybe an MS4 that has a TMDL issue to it. Or another opportunity is an MS4 where the permit is about to be reissued. So these are all factors, but you really need to decide which MS4 you want to choose. But this, choosing the permittee you want to evaluate ties very closely to the type of evaluation or the focus evaluation you want to use. And you need to decide what are your objectives. So you're really trying to essentially assess compliance with their program. Are you interested in collecting data on permit reissuance? Do you just want to get to know better what the permittee is doing, kind of what the general strengths and weaknesses are, or provide some compliance assistance to help them with the program? And even another objective could be just strictly enforcement. Are you looking to make an example of someone? And you could have multiple objectives under your program. And then as Jenny mentioned, between these comprehensive and screening level evaluations, what kind of level of detail do you want to focus on? The next one you need to prepare for is essentially arranging your logistics. So, we've conducted about 130 of these evaluations so far. And, doing an MS4 evaluation is not like doing a regular stormwater inspection. You can't really go in without any notice and do these effectively. So we found you really need a couple-week notice to the permittee to set it up, make sure that the right staff is available, and make sure you can talk to the right people. So you need to notify the permittee in advance. We usually hold a kickoff conference call a couple weeks in advance with the permittee to kind of describe the goals, objectives, the evaluation. You want to make sure that the logistics are straightened out, that you have a schedule, that the right people are in the right place at the right time. Establish expectations, and then answer any questions for the permittee. You want to make sure that they understand what you need and then can provide it during the on-site evaluation. In terms of scheduling, we'll go through a schedule in a couple slides, but we generally spend anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, possibly even a whole day on a specific program component. And we do try and schedule both in-office time with the staff and then go out into the field and observe some of those observations. And so these screening level evaluations, as Jenny mentioned, can last anywhere from a couple hours to 3 or 4 days for a comprehensive evaluation. Now, in terms of the topics, most of the evaluations that have been conducted have been generally comprehensive evaluations where we're looking at all the main program topics from maintenance, construction, post-construction, illicit discharge, etc. But you can focus also on a very specific topic, and one example of where we've done that is working with Los Angeles, where we focused on just, say, the new development component or just the construction component. And where that works really well is where you have a number of co-permittees, where it's just physically not possible to evaluate all those permittees at the same time or within a reasonable amount of time. You can do a focused evaluation on just a program component, see where the problems are in several permittees, and then broadcast that information to everyone so everyone knows what the expectations are for an effective construction program or post-construction program. But then there's in-field topics also you can address, like looking at construction inspection process, industrial inspections, maintenance yards, and other things like that. And in terms of additional preparation, you want to essentially set a schedule. So what we do is there's an example schedule here. There's several actual example schedules in the MS4 evaluation guide. But we basically start off with a kickoff meeting. Again, that reiterates what we held during that kickoff conference call with the city. But it allows you to reintroduce the goals and benefits of the audit. Allows you to go through the schedule again and make sure that everyone's clear. It allows you to discuss the product and timeline and answer any of the overall questions. This is also a good time for the city to bring in any managers or kind of upper-level staff so it can kind of hear what the purpose of the audit is and then come back later for the outbrief. The main time on the audit is basically spent during interviews and field visits. That's the bulk of the evaluation. We'll cover that in detail later. And then we wrap up with generally an outbrief meeting, which is a verbal summary of the findings from that week. It's generally preliminary. We don't couch these as final findings. Usually there's additional research and information needs to be collected before any final findings are written, but it also provides an opportunity for the city to ask any questions or clarify any of the findings one last time. And then finally, in terms of preparation, it's a good time to go out and just review the available information on paper, things like the MS4 permit, either a Phase 1 permit or Phase 2 permit, the latest annual report. You want to see what information the permittee just reported on. If they've written the stormwater management plan, you should try and get a copy of that and review it beforehand. And any other relevant documents, things like TMDL implementation plans, watershed plans, maybe any correspondence between the permitting authority and the MS4. If they've been corresponding on specific issues, you should be aware of that and get copies of that. Even past inspections or MS4 evaluations in the city, if you're able to get copies of those, again, just provides you with more background information to prepare you. And then this is also a good opportunity to identify some of the key issues and questions you may want to ask during the audit. We've often circled sections of the permit or identified questions in the stormwater management plan after reviewing those to help during the audit process. And then we actually go to conducting the evaluation, and that consists of 3 components: the staff interviews, the field visits, and then the MS4 facility inspections. And this is where we just want to reiterate that you're not just asking a list of questions. This is really more of a discussion with the MS4. So the MS4 evaluation guide is really intended to prepare you for those questions, but you need to really go with the flow, and if the discussion takes you in a certain direction, delve more into that topic more directly. But this is where you interview staff. For example, for new development, you may want to talk to the plan reviewers and managers. For industrial and commercial, you may want to talk to the inspectors and managers on how that program works. Again, you'll have a list of topics and questions already identified for that program area, but then make sure you're flexible enough that you can ask additional questions as they answer on specific issues. It often helps to ask the city to provide a brief overview of each of the program components. Again, it just provides, gets the discussion going and allows them to kind of summarize, how they implement that program. We generally don't ask them to provide any formal presentation, but just, again, a 5 or 10 minute summary of how they implement that. And then again, make sure you ask more questions as you drill down into the details of that topic. Some suggestions in terms of interviewing staff. Make sure you ask for examples and view the documentation. So, if they have a construction list, inventory, try and get a copy of that. Try and get a copy of their construction plans or inspection records. If you're talking about a list of discharges, try and get copies of their spill response or a list of discharge investigation reports. Again, don't feel like you need to follow a script. If there's a certain topic, follow that until you're satisfied that all your questions have been answered. And try and make this an open discussion wherever possible. It's really beneficial, we found, to use this as more of a cooperative process. We found that the cities are more open to discussion if the evaluator is, again, maybe friendly isn't the term, but more open to discussion. If you're coming at it from more of an enforcement bent or a hammer, people tend to clam up, and you may not get the answers you're looking for.
Don, I think they can be friendly, don't you, Jenny?
The next component is the field visits, and this is actually a very useful part of the evaluation. We've gone out in the field a lot, primarily focused on construction, industrial, and the municipal components. And what you're really doing here is observing how the MS4 staff do their regular job. So you're trying to see how they do their inspection process, how thorough are they, what kind of questions they ask, what kind of things do they look for. Don't have them just explain what they're doing, but have them actually do their job. It also would be helpful to try and take photographs where you can, try and keep track of the sites and the information you go out to. Another field component that's good to visit is the municipal component. And here's an example where you can go out and maybe observe some crews out in the field. If someone is out doing some street repairs, or a crew is out doing an illicit discharge investigation, go out with them, talk to the staff on how they're doing that job, maybe ask them some other questions and see what kind of training they have. It's often beneficial to ask your question multiple times amongst the staff. Ask the managers how often people are trained. Ask the field staff how often they're trained. You sometimes get different responses to those questions. And then another good area for doing field inspections are at the maintenance yards. So going out and looking at their maintenance yard, and this is really where, as an MS4 evaluator, this is where more of you're doing the inspection and not watching the city do the inspection. So you want to go out and observe the general site conditions and housekeeping status. Are there any obvious stormwater problems at the municipal maintenance yards? Try and see if they have a SWIP or some type of stormwater plan for their maintenance yards. And again, take photos, because obviously how the city maintains its own property can be indicative of how it treats stormwater overall. And then in the terms of post-evaluation activities, the first step is preparing the report. So, some tips on trying to get the right information during the evaluation. Use sign-up sheets to try and make sure you know who you're talking to, trying to get names and phone numbers. We often ask or notify them that we may need to contact them in the future to follow up with any additional questions, so having that sign-up sheet helps. Make sure you take lots of notes. It's really hard, going through this over a day or 3 days to remember everything that was said. So feel free to take time out and, make sure your notes are detailed so you're able to go back and summarize your findings later. Also during the evaluation or immediately after, you should identify the key findings and kind of summarize those main points right away. Again, it just helps in the future. And then use photos where possible to try and illustrate some of those examples. We'll talk about an example report writing later in the presentation, but in terms of distributing the report, you should try, as a permitting authority, try and get the report out in a timely manner. It can, we understand, take a couple months to go through the review process and writing process and get this out, but the sooner you can get that to the city, the quicker they can start fixing some of these issues. But when the report goes out, try and identify and summarize the key findings. What is it the city or MS4 needs to change? Identify any corrective actions, and then give them a deadline for a response that they need to identify any of those corrective actions to you. And then in terms of following up, the permittees are usually given an opportunity to refute the findings. They can do this in writing. You can hold a meeting to do that with them. In the meeting, you can schedule time to sit down with them and discuss any of those findings. The permittee should or could submit a compliance plan with a description of activities, a schedule for when they're going to fix some of these identified deficiencies. But as a permitting authority, you should work with them to try and identify those key areas and when they need to fix some of those factors. And then just follow up on some of these deficiencies to make sure that those corrections were made. So, for example, if there were problems at maintenance yards, you may want to do a follow-up inspection several months later to make sure those deficiencies were corrected. So now I'll turn it back to Nikos for our next poll question.
All right, and thank you, John. So we have another poll question, and then immediately after this, we're going to take questions from the audience. So all our speakers should get prepared. But our poll question this time is, have you been part of an on-site MS4 evaluation in the past? So you can select a couple of answers there. Yes, you were subject to an evaluation. Yes, you participated in it as a state or EPA regulator. You did a self-audit, or no, you haven't. So we'll give you a couple minutes to answer that question. Again, just select the radio button to the left of the particular answer that you like and hit the Submit Answer button. And by the way, I neglected to say that the speaker that just was talking was John Costco of Tetra Tech. I'm not used to having two Johns on the line, so I will try to make it clear who is speaking at any given time. And John Tinger from Region 9 will be our last speaker, but you might hear them interrupting as we, not interrupting, but interjecting as we go along. So let's see the answers for the poll questions here. Yes, we have good answers here, so I will show you those next. And overwhelmingly no. Well, that's not a big surprise since this program is relatively new. The regulations came into effect in 2003, and well, there's phase one, as Jenny points out. So some of you phase one should have been in there, that's for sure. But anyway, we have 11% said yes, they have been, which is a pretty good number. 5% of the state and EPA regulators are saying that they have, so I think we need to jump that number up a little bit. And 6.7% said they have done a self-audit. So there you have it. And so now we're going to go to questions from the audience. And actually, based on that, the first question comes from an undisclosed participant in an undisclosed part of the country. And this could be for anybody here. But how often would you recommend that audits be conducted, both by regulatory agencies or MS4 self-audits?
I'll take that one because this is John Costco. I think ideally, audit from a regulatory agency would be conducted at least once a permit term. I mean, ideally, I guess it would be more often than that, but at a minimum, I would say once per permit term. From a self-audit perspective, you may want to do it more frequently. Annually, maybe a little bit too much, but at least 2 or 3 times during the course of the permit term. Maybe once towards the beginning and once towards the end at least, to make sure you're on the right track.
All right, very good. We have another question here from Andy in Medina County, and he wants to know how long should the MS4s be expected to wait for the written result of the audit? Well, it looks like maybe he was waiting around a little bit for his. Any reactions to that question?
This might be a good one for John Tinger. He's put out a lot of reports.
Sure, yeah, this is John Tinger in EPA Region 9. I think John Costco made a good point that audit reports need to be put out as soon as possible because it's fresh in everybody's mind to identify what the positive elements of the audit were as well as what the negative elements and deficiencies were. We try and get things out in about 3 months typically. There is a significant amount of time sometimes for review. If EPA is the main proponent of the audit, then it'll go through a state review often. Sometimes the enforcement folks like to look at it. Sometimes the permitting folks like to look at it. But one of the key components, I think, too, is that the audit needs to say that it's not an official finding or not a formal finding of violation. In that case, we usually say it's a potential violation so that it gives the MS4 a chance to respond to what may be perceived deficiencies, and then it doesn't have to be so set in stone.
Good. That's and that actually kind of leads into the next question here from David in Hillsborough County. He wants to know, can an MS4 evaluation be requested by a permittee in order to help them identify areas that need improvement in their stormwater management plan without having the regulatory enforcement aspect hanging over them?
Well, I guess I can take that one. The first part of the question is, of course, you can ask. And if you haven't seen your permitting authority before now, it's not because they don't care about you or your program. It's usually because they have very limited staff to do that sort of thing. However, if you're going to invite the person who's regulating you in to take a look at your program, even if ahead of time you both agree it's largely for technical assistance, if they come across something that's a really significant deficiency, of course there's no guarantee of a buy. So, be careful what you ask for, I guess, is the word of caution.
Jason wants to add something to that?
Yeah, I was going to start with that same one. Be careful what you ask for.
I was going to start with that same caveat, be careful what you ask for, but I'd also say just be careful when you ask for it. In other words, if you really want to do this, do it early in your permit cycle so you have time before your permit cycle's over to address some deficiencies, because that's something I'll talk about in my presentation in terms of timing relative to the permit cycle.
Very good. And we've got another question here from James in an undisclosed location. And you all were talking about how you can customize this for the particular permit that's covering the MS4. So James would like to know, given the ability or the direction that we've given that the state should customize this audit guide to meet their requirements, how beneficial or I guess maybe how might an MS4 do a self-evaluation if the state hasn't really customized the list yet?
Well, I would say the answer to that is use this in conjunction with your permit, because your permit is what explains what your specific requirements are. I would also say that it might be very useful to call up your permitting authority and ask them if they think there's, in addition to a guide like this and your permit, if there's anything else that you ought to be using in the process of a self-audit.
Yeah, and Nico, just to add that one issue with the whole MS4 program, though, is that it is very broad and flexible. If you look at the 6 minimum measures in Phase 2, they're written very broadly, and there's a lot of activities that could happen underneath that. So the permit writers have a lot of flexibility in interpreting that and writing permit conditions, and the MS4s have a lot of flexibility in implementing those requirements. So, unfortunately, you can't. There's not a checklist of things you have to do to meet Phase 2, down to very specific activities. There's a lot of still interpretation. Even as we write the MS4 evaluation guide, there's still a lot of flexibility within that.
Okay, and we have two more questions that I'm going to combine together. Robert and Scott were asking about whether a self-audit ought to be conducted by the municipality themselves or whether it would be useful to have a third-party consultant do that. And then the follow-up question, which was actually from Scott, would be then what are the approximate costs of doing that?
Well, I guess it's all in your perspective. It can be helpful to have an independent person come in and do it. And the reason behind that being they're looking at things fresh. We often go to municipal maintenance yards that, the staff are there every single day and they walk by these problems at the site. And it's not until someone walks on the site really for the first time and starts pointing these things out that the staff really see these issues. So I think it can easily be done by the MS4 staff, but it can also be helpful if it is someone independent, not tied into the program. Costs can vary. For a single city, it can be anywhere from, several $1,000s, $5,000 or $6,000 to, $15,000 or $20,000, depending on the complexity and amount of time and all that involved.
Mm-hmm. All right.
I would just, this is John Tinger in Region 9 again. I would just add a little bit more to the enormous benefit that could be done by doing a self-audit. I mean, these are, if you can think of an audit as a test, I mean, this MS4 audit guide is the answer sheet, and a lot of the same questions can be used to essentially walk through how a municipality's program is currently working to identify what potential deficiencies or weaknesses are. And certainly a lot of the questions aren't going to be applicable because it's a very comprehensive program, but if by going through some of the questions and the logic that's contained in the audit guide, I think there could be a large benefit either doing it in-house or through an outside contractor.
Okay, well, we're going to continue on. I want to encourage everybody in the audience there to keep sending in questions. Those were great questions. And we're going to try to pick out questions as we go along that relate to the material. So as in this next section with John Costco is going to cover from Tetra Tech, if you have some specific questions related to what he's talking about, feel free to submit those as we go along. So John, I turn it over to you.
Okay, Nikos, we can go to the next slide. What we want to do with this section is just give you an example, again, a very brief example. We have, 15 minutes or so to talk about this, and it typically takes several hours. So we want to kind of boil this down and give you an example of how you could audit a municipal construction program. And instead of picking on Arlington County or someone else and airing their dirty laundry, we made up a hypothetical MS4 here. So we're auditing Stormville. It's a Phase 2 MS4, roughly 35,000 population, and they received their permit coverage in March 2003 and have been developing and implementing a stormwater management program. So actually, this is a nice time to do an evaluation of them because they should be getting their new permit in the next year or so. As a permitting authority, it's a good time to come in and see, does the Phase 2 permit need to change because of something, Stormville is doing. And this is a growing city with lots of development, so that's why we're focusing on construction. But the first thing, again, is preparing for the evaluation. And for construction specifically, you obviously, as we mentioned earlier, want to review the permit requirements, and you want to specifically look at what they're required to do under their construction requirements in there. Is there a specified frequency of inspections? Are there deadlines they have to meet in the permit? Review their stormwater management program. See if there are measurable goals. Again, are there activities that they committed to do, so you can ask about those. Look at their latest annual report, again, for the construction-specific information. See if they talk about, the number of inspections or frequency or other information like that. And then when you're reviewing the construction component, it's also very helpful to make sure you're familiar with the state construction general permit requirements. And the reason behind that is the MS4, Stormville, is both an MS4 permittee, but they're also applying for construction permits for their own public construction projects. So So you need to be familiar with the state requirements to make sure that the city is following those also. So as a state regulator, you want to see if you can try and get a list of the NPDES permitted construction projects within that city. If you're able to get that before you go out, that's very, very helpful. If you can get any construction inspection reports of inspections within that city, again, maybe by your co-regulators or co-inspectors at the state. And then the last thing I would do is review the stormwater website for Stormville. Again, you can get really good information on what they're currently doing, guidance and forums and things like that. So if you look, if you've had a chance to download the MS4 evaluation guide, for each program component, we've kind of broken it up into the kind of the key issues that you need to address during the audit for that program component. So for construction, we've identified, 6 or 7 different elements here, starting with legal authority through plan review procedures, training, and public construction projects. Again, these are kind of the main topics within construction that puts together a good construction stormwater program. And we'll address each of these individually with the next set of slides. So again, the first thing you need to review is their legal authority. And just as a side note, when we talk about legal authority, we're really talking about how the stormwater staff implement that legal authority. I would not, and I can verify this with experience, I would not invite the city attorney into these meetings unless you're an attorney yourself. I mean, most of us in the stormwater program are engineers or scientists or planners or something. I'm more interested in how the stormwater staff, the inspectors, the managers implement that legal authority. I don't really want to sit across the table from the city attorney and get grilled on their legal authority. So
you've heard it here first. John Slam's attorneys, and you can tell he's an engineer, and of course that goes back to the caveat at the beginning that EPA doesn't endorse what these speakers are saying. But yeah, we always have to get in a good joke every once in a while.
Well, if you're an engineer, you're not going to win an argument with the city attorney, so that's why. But there are some key questions you want to ask. Obviously you want to know what their threshold is for coverage. Are they covering sites down to 1 acre, 5,000 square feet? What is their threshold? Do they have any specific exemptions, or are they exempting single-family home developments? They exempt other types of sites, and why are they exempting those? What are the specific requirements in the legal authority? Do they specify what kind of BMPs? Do they specify what kind of plan needs to be submitted? Does the legal authority address other pollutants at the construction site? Phase 2 is very specific, and it requires the legal authority to address other pollutants other than just sediment. And then what kind of enforcement is written into legal authority? Are there specific financial penalties? Do they, authorize the inspectors to take enforcement? Is there, only the city attorney can issue the enforcement order? You need to know kind of what the enforcement authority is within the ordinance. And if you need an example of model ordinances, there are links from EPA's website to model ordinances. The next issue to look at is their construction project inventory. So obviously you need to know where the construction sites are and how many there are in order to review the plans and do the inspections. So try and find out how Stormville tracks their information on construction projects. Are they using, a database, spreadsheet? Is it linked to GIS? And then what kind of information is stored in that? Obviously, they're probably tracking their plan review procedures, especially if they have plan review fees. But are they, tracking it based on disturbed area, location? Are the inspection findings tied in that database? Any follow-up enforcement to identify complaints somehow in that database? What kind of information are they track? And you also want to see if you can find out, how many projects are greater than an acre. That helps you, identify those projects that may also be under the state general permit. And see if you can find out how many public projects there are currently. Again, you might be able to go out and visit 1 or 2 of those during the evaluation. The next topic to address are essentially the stormwater requirements and BMPs required. And this is typically done through an erosion sediment control manual or a BMP manual. So in Stormville's case, they do have a stormwater management BMP manual. We'll want to ask them, obviously it probably would include sediment erosion control BMPs, but do the BMPs address other issues such as vehicle maintenance, portable toilets, concrete washouts, those other pollutants at the construction site? And, talking to Stormville here, maybe we find out that their erosion sediment control or stormwater manual only addresses erosion sediment control at active construction sites. So maybe that's something they're missing, and we identify that as a potential finding. Are these BMPs required or recommended? Essentially, is this guidance, or are they required to follow and implement the BMPs in that manual? And then does the manual provide any type of BMP selection criteria? Again, more for post-construction issues, but do they describe what BMPs are appropriate when? And then the next major component is the plan review procedures. And sometimes, especially for plan review procedures, it can be difficult to separate the construction and post-construction aspects. A lot of these things at the municipal level happens at the same time. But you want to talk to the plan review staff, and this is a great place to ask them to bring out examples of plans they're currently reviewing. But you want to talk about who performs those reviews. Do they require any pre-submittal meetings to discuss requirements? What kind of information do they give to developers before the plans are submitted? Does the city implement stormwater-related conditions of approval on proposed plans? Do they, plan reviewers, use checklists or other information during the review? Do they go out and visit the site or verify NPDES permit compliance during their plan review process? And then we want to go out and do some inspections. So you need to both talk to the inspectors in the office and then go out into the field, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But find out, who does the inspections. Do they have dedicated staff? Are they using, maybe building or infrastructure inspectors to do the erosion sediment control inspections? How often or when do they do those inspections? And how do they determine priority for doing the inspections? And then are they using checklists or other documentation to document their inspections? You should also review a number of their inspection reports. You can, again, do this out in the field or in the office, but look at, how detailed they are. Are they identifying specific problems, or, are they more generic? Are they giving specific deadlines and follow-up activities? How are they tracking their verbal warnings? Because oftentimes we see they'll give a verbal warning to a site, but there's no tracking or follow-up on whether that verbal warning was corrected. And then the next component to address is enforcement. We want to know, how are inspectors authorized to issue enforcement, the NOVs or administrative fines? Does the inspector have to go through several hoops before they can, essentially do any action, or do they have authority to take more direct action on the site? Do they use or have they employed any formal enforcement response procedures, basically an enforcement response plan? And then ask them to describe a recent enforcement case, and again, review some files on past enforcement actions. It gives you an idea of what kind of actions they've taken in the past. And then the next issue to address is essentially training and education. We're interested both in the training of the city staff and then any educational materials they provide to contractors and developers. So, how often they train their plan review staff, how often they train their inspection staff, what kind of educational materials do they provide to contractors. On your screen, you see an example of, a small site layout with BMPs described. Again, a very clear illustration of what the city expects on small construction sites. And how do they then provide that outreach to the general public? Is it through their website? Is it, given to them when they first apply for a permit? How is that outreach material sent out? And then the last key component to address is the public construction projects. And this is really key because, as mentioned before, as a city, you can be regulated essentially twice. You're regulated under your MS4 permit, but if you're disturbing more than an acre, you're also going to need to go out and get an NPDES construction permit. surprisingly, that doesn't always happen. Cities are sometimes very embarrassed when we go out in a public construction project and find that they don't have MPS permit coverage for that. So you can ask them, essentially, does their public construction projects follow the same BMP, same requirements as private projects? Again, sometimes that doesn't happen. Who reviews these projects? Is it the same plan review staff? And who does inspections? Is it essentially the same inspectors, or is it public works inspectors? And then the last component is to go out into the field and basically accompany inspectors on a number of site inspections. See what the inspector looks at in the field. Are they looking at the plans? Are they, talking to construction operators? What kinds of things are they looking for? Are they walking the entire project, or are they doing essentially more of a drive-by inspection? Are they going down to, look at the outfall locations or discharge points? We often tell the cities to take us to basically their problem sites. We want to see these inspectors in action. So, an example on your screen, the bottom right illustration was a concrete washout that was just a total mess. When we went there with an MS4 inspector, they did a great job of basically shutting the project down until that mess was taken care of. They had, trucks out. They had the construction operator bring their trucks out. The crews were, sweeping and trying to clean everything up immediately. So it's often better to have them take you to a problem site than, more of a pristine project, so you can see what they're doing. And then just as a quick example on documenting your findings, there are many different ways you can basically document your findings of an audit or evaluation. This example, say for Stormville, we found that, again, they didn't address these other pollutants of concern. So you essentially want to identify that as a key issue, a bullet point. The city is not requiring BMPs to address other pollutants, other sediment sites. And then you want to describe what you observed and what they need to do to fix that. So the city's ordinance and BMP manual only addresses sediment, not other pollutants. Plan review staff only review for erosion sediment control BMPs. The city needs to revise their ordinance and BMP manual to require these other controls in construction sites.
This is Jenny. I just want to make it rather clear that each of these sections goes through a very extensive and comprehensive list of questions that you would ask in the interview portion as well as the field portion of an evaluation. And I want to make it clear that just because maybe you might answer no to a couple of questions doesn't automatically mean you're in violation of your permit or that there's a deficient aspect to your program. These sets of questions are really designed to be so comprehensive and detailed so that the person doing the evaluation gets a really solid understanding of your program. And as everyone knows, there are sometimes many different ways to cover off a specific provision. And so if you don't have a couple of things here, maybe you have some other things that compensate for that. If you actually do use this guide for self-audit, make sure you're actually achieving the intent as well as the letter of what's in your permit. And if you're answering no to a couple of questions, see if there's some other way that you actually are achieving the desired outcome there. So these questions are really just designed to make sure everybody understands what your program's like.
Okay, we're going to take some questions from the audience again, and we've got quite a number of questions here. So I think we'll start, let's see here, with Patricia from California. She's asking, what are the chances that positive findings by EPA, things that MS4s are doing a great job at, can be shared with other permittees, perhaps on a website or something like that, so that MS4s aren't trying to reinvent the wheel?
Well, that's actually a really great question. In fact, we have a website, part of the Stormwater website. There's a page that actually is examples of what we consider to be very solid program components that MS4s have implemented. So, Patricia, if you or anybody else are aware of any MS4s doing a great job on one aspect of their program or another, please let us know about it because we could write that up as another case study.
Yeah, the website that Jenny is referring to is on the NPDES website, www.epa.gov/NPDES/stormwater/case study, all one word. So we have some examples up there. I think, John Tinger, are you there? I think you have some of yours posted as well. Is that correct?
That's right. On the Region 9 website, there are also some case studies documenting exceptional programs.
And do you have some of your audit reports also posted there?
Yes, all of the audit reports are posted on our website, and I'll talk a little bit about that later in my presentation where I have the website written down as well.
Okay, very good. Bill would like to know, was there coordination between EPA permit writers and auditors in preparing this guidance document?
Yes, there was, and not just EPA, but we also had some state programs involved. And we did involve both permit writers and enforcement staff in doing this.
Okay. And let's see, Patricia in the City of Falls Church would like to know, and I think this is John, you mentioned John Costco, I keep forgetting that. You mentioned a website where you could get a list of construction projects that are permitted under a general permit. What is that website?
For EPA issued permits, there is the website. It's a link from EPA's MPDS site called View NOI Permits. You should be able to find it there. But that's only for where EPA issues the permits. If you're in a state like Virginia where they issue their own permits, you may need to get that information from your state permitting authority.
Okay. And yeah, many states are starting now to post their construction notices of intent or whatever term of art they use for those applications under their general permit. So you can look at the state websites. Let's see. Andre would like to know, or have you guys clarify a little bit, so this is for anybody, what exactly is meant by deficiency, and does it mean that the permittee must correct it or face an enforcement action? Is it a lower threshold? And what's the basis of finding a deficiency versus a violation?
Well, I'll take a shot at that, and John Tinger might want to also. A deficiency, I think, is something we're saying isn't necessarily a permit violation, but it's a weak aspect of the program that deserves to have some attention paid to it and make some improvements. What is actually a permit violation is going to be case by case largely, depending on what the permit says and what the policies of the permitting authority are.
Okay, and I think now we'll end this question break, and we'll move to Jason is our next speaker, and Jason's going to talk about his perspective of actually having us come out and audit his program in a friendly way, I should mention. I hope, right? Jason, was it friendly?
Mostly. We'll get into that later. No, it was. It was. Thanks, Nikos. I'm going to get into our Arlington County's experience with its audit that was conducted in September of 2005. I want to start briefly by just giving a little bit of an overview of Arlington County and stormwater as well. For those of you who don't know, Arlington County is located directly across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C., and also EPA headquarters, and so that may be one reason why we are audited among several, but we are a heavily developed urban area, and I think a lot of, particularly the Phase 1 communities out there, and probably a number of Phase 2 communities can relate to some of these statistics. We have a high degree of impervious area and a severely altered drainage network. Next slide, please, Nikos. We only have about 30% of our historical stream network remaining in place as a result of the extensive development that occurred in Arlington County, particularly following World War II. You can see in these two images the remaining streams in bold and the historical network as dashed lines. And in the upper image, all that sea of red is our more than 360 miles of underground storm sewer. So we have more than 10 times the amount of storm sewer that we, as compared with the amount of natural stream channels remaining. So our main stormwater challenges are, I think, fairly straightforward for an urban area like ours. Most of our development occurred before there are any requirements to do anything about stormwater quality or quantity. And that's taken a heavy toll on our stream ecology, on water quality, and even our infrastructure as well. We are actively and heavily redeveloping, and that mostly taking the form of impervious area being replaced by new impervious area. And those are opportunities to improve water quality, but that's a long-term benefit. It takes decades, really, before you see the benefits of new controls being put in, I think, on our stream systems. Next slide, please. The regulatory framework that we're looking at, we have an MS4 permit. A couple of our streams are affected by the water quality standards and TMDL programs. And like most jurisdictions in this region, we are a couple years away from a water quality deadline for the Chesapeake Bay, and that's going to be hitting us as well. And then we have local ordinances for stormwater quality and quantity and erosion sediment control. So in terms of how we focused our watershed management program, it really is driven by our built-out nature. We look to do a lot of urban best housekeeping, urban housekeeping best practices ranging from street sweeping to catch basin cleaning, pollution prevention. We have an active stream restoration program. We are looking for opportunities and have implemented some opportunities to try to retrofit some of our storm sewer network with stormwater quality controls. We do deal with development projects as they come in, and we have a very active outreach, education, and monitoring programs. So given all that, I'll turn our attention to our experience with our audit. And again, this audit took place in September of 2005. This was in the 7th year of our permit program. So we received our first permit in August of '97. It was renewed in 2002. And the program in the state of Virginia was transferred to a new agency in January of '05, and we were notified of our audit shortly thereafter. So we were certainly concerned about some of the timing issues that I touched on earlier when the question was brought up about should you request an audit. We've had a permit, or at the time we had a permit for 7 years, and hadn't really gotten much oversight and feedback. And I think one thing to point out here is this MS4 program evaluation guide is a great tool, but I think everyone would agree it's probably 10 years late, particularly for the Phase 1 communities. It might be right on time for Phase 2, but the Phase 1 communities really could have benefited from something like this probably 10 years ago. So we were a little wary of the process and the potential regulatory implications, but we tried to look at it also as an opportunity, both for educating the regulatory community, but also our internal management on some of the resource needs that we felt we had. And our preparation was a lot like what Jenny and John talked about. You pull a lot of information together, files, data. There's a lot of coordination to pull relevant staff together. I think like most communities out there, our stormwater programs kind of evolve in an ad hoc way. And so, there's a lot of coordination that needs to occur. It's not necessarily all in one place. It certainly isn't in Arlington County. So we had a 3-day audit process, and in fact, John Costco with Tetra Tech was one of the lead participants. Jenny participated as well, and it was really well organized. The staff in Arlington, I think, were engaged as well and kind of enjoyed the dialogue. It went smoothly. I think the only thing that was a little interesting, and I think this is reflected in part the shift in Virginia to a new agency, is the division of authority between EPA and the state. And that was a little unclear at the time.
Jason, do you want to just elaborate a little bit on the change that happened in
Sure.
Virginia? Because I think that might be sort of illustrative for people, particularly about the timing issues, too, because I think that played into that.
Sure. The Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, who manages basically the MPDES program for Virginia, it's called the VPDES program, also managed the MS4 permits from their inception in Virginia in the mid-90s. And they're very much a point source agency, very experienced with traditional point sources like wastewater treatment, for example, or industrial discharges. And I think the stormwater program was something that they weren't quite sure what to do with. It was an MPDES program, but the similarities kind of end there when it comes to how you deal with stormwater. the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation oversees the state stormwater management program, which really pertains to regulating development projects, post-construction stormwater runoff. And the decision was made at the state level to bring this program, the MS4 program, into DCR because of their, I'd say, increased knowledge about stormwater runoff, non-point source pollution. And that shift occurred right around the time, right before we were notified of our audit in 2005. So in terms of the audit results, and we got our report, I would say, overall in a timely fashion. The audit took place in early September. We got our report, I believe, in November of 2005. It was about 6 weeks after the audit. And we had some advance notice of what types of things it would contain. Our strengths included a variety of things, from our coordination communication efforts, our stream restoration program, some of our urban housekeeping programs, plan review, and outreach education and monitoring. The key deficiencies included, and I think this is, at least I see it as a nationwide issue, and that is having enough resources in place to ensure that all these stormwater facilities that we're requiring are actually maintained properly. And so that includes a variety of components, including having an inspection component. Some of our capabilities to track and follow up on illicit discharges. Other deficiencies included inspection, pollution prevention efforts for high-risk businesses. In Arlington, these are primarily, we have a lot of automotive-related businesses in Arlington, and so there's a lot of potential there for stormwater runoff issues. And we had some issues at our municipal maintenance yards that a very detailed inspection by the audit team revealed. And here's, I guess, kind of for us what was a concern about the process, and that is this audit took place in year 3 of 5 of our permit cycle, basically at the beginning of our budgeting process for the next fiscal year. And there are a couple things that EPA and the state mandated that we deal with before the end of the permit cycle, which by the time we got our report was less than 2 years away. And also by the time we got our report, the budget process for the next fiscal year was already underway. And, we had some concerns about that. In part, just the realities of budgeting and getting additional resources. But also, we kind of felt that there was a shared responsibility with how the program in Virginia had been handled for the first, almost 10 years of the program. And hope that there are a little bit more reasonable expectations on some of these deadlines. But at the same time, we really did believe and do believe now that this was a very useful tool to look at our strengths and weaknesses and get the necessary resources to kind of address some of those deficiencies. And we believe we're on a path now to get those resources. We have a proposal in our budget that goes out to the public in about a month to get some key positions in place to deal with some of the stormwater facility and illicit discharge resource needs. So as we look ahead to our next permit, which our permit expires at the end of August of this year, of 2007, and some of the permits, the next round of Phase 1 permits for other Virginia localities are already out there in draft form. And what we've seen, some of the concerns we have revolve around the growing emphasis on reporting, monitoring, and assessment. And while those things are important, particularly when you're dealing with stormwater and environmental monitoring, there's a very significant resource need to do those things right. And we're concerned about how that might take resources away from actual implementation of water quality improvement projects. As I touched on at the beginning, we're facing a real uphill battle against legacy land use decisions in terms of how our county was developed and how you deal with all that uncontrolled impervious cover. And I think the next evolution in the stormwater permitting world is moving from the MEP standard, the maximum extent practicable standard, to actual compliance with water quality standards. And again, while of course it's important to achieve our water quality standards, we're concerned again about how we get to those, get improvements in the situation. We're looking at probably decades worth of implementation needs before we really start seeing water quality improvements in urban areas like ours.
Thank you, Jason. So we've got some questions, and a couple of them here are specifically for you. And this first one is kind of funny. This is from Steve in the city of Salem. And first of all, he wants to know if you're a bad actor.
I'll let Jenny answer that. I think we're a good actor, but no, go ahead, Jenny.
Yeah, I'll answer that. And remember,
No, it's
you know,
a joke.
no, you can't quote me on this because I don't work for DCR, and ultimately everything's their call. But Arlington was not the only MS4 that was audited in Virginia 2 years ago. When DCR took over the program, they went out and audited most all of their Phase 1 MS4s. And relatively speaking, I would say Arlington has a very solid program.
Okay, there's a second part of this question for you, Jason. Steve would like to know if you are experiencing any significant interest from third parties, perhaps members of the public or other organizations that are now interested in your stormwater program.
I wouldn't say as a result of the audit, if that may be what the intent of the question was. I think there is a growing interest overall. Some of it actually driven by, we had a major flood event here last June, and I think it raised people's awareness about stormwater in general and beyond just flooding. And of course, that was an acute problem for a lot of people, but also how we manage stormwater overall and how we deal with some of our issues.
Okay. Shannon in Frederick County. Let's see. Yes. What expectations does EPA have during audits of TMDL implementation for MS4 permits at this time, and how is this expected to change in the future? Anybody want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I think that, this is John Costco. I think there's definitely an expectation that the TMDLs be somehow addressed in the MS4 program. I think we're all in the MS4 program struggling to figure out how that's done. There's not many TMDLs that specifically identify and address MS4 waste load allocations yet in the TMDL. Jenny or John, do you have anything to add on that?
Blank stares?
Now, I guess I would just say the first step is actually seeing how those TMDL requirements or waste load allocations are going to be articulated in the permit if they aren't already. And that's what's going to determine what the standard is during an evaluation or what you're supposed to be doing.
Excuse me. Shannon in Frederick County is wondering why Arlington County would be responsible for inspecting and pollution prevention efforts at quote-unquote high-risk businesses. Can you explain that, Jason?
I can. I think EPA and others could as well. But it's one of the permit sections is there's a whole part of our permit that deals with this type of runoff, industrial and high-risk stormwater runoff. And it's not that we're necessarily responsible for it, but it's one of those components that the permittee is supposed to have a handle on, either through inspection or perhaps referring particular businesses to the proper state agency to get a permit. So it's really kind of a responsibility in the sense that you're trying to control as best as you can those pollutants that enter your stormwater system from other sources.
Yeah, and because this is an example, again, this is John Costco. What we're finding now is that a lot of the traditional, quote, heavy industries, have their MPDS permits. They're being somewhat adequately covered. The problems now are more from the commercial businesses, and the permits, MS4 permits in California are now starting to address those more specifically, and things like the auto body shops, the restaurants, other things like that.
Carol in Davenport wonders if you can give examples of retrofit BMPs that work for water quality.
I can talk about some of the things we're doing. We're kind of focusing on two key areas. One is actually restoring our stream corridors and our heavily eroded stream systems, and that in and of itself can reduce pollutant loads, particularly from stream bank erosion. But in our storm drainage network itself, I think one of the areas we're looking at as kind of a baseline pollutant reduction technique are some of these hydrodynamic stormwater BMPs that can be installed within your network to deal with gross pollutants like sediment and litter, as well as petroleum. And one of our goals is to retrofit our network relatively extensively to kind of get a handle on some of those pollutants.
Okay, and Martina's wondering, how did you prepare the rest of the Arlington staff for the audit?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. We had a good amount of notice, thankfully, and we were able to pull key staff together in a couple of meetings to kind of go over what information was going to be looked at and requested, and that was provided to us ahead of time as well. We had a schedule ahead of time, and everyone was very cooperative. Again, we've been doing this for a number of years and have a good lines of communication with various agencies and departments. So we were able to do that both with line level staff, but we also had to prepare ARPA level management as well and make them aware of what was going on and what the potential implications are, and so we did that as well.
Okay, and last question here from Lori in Indiana. She's wondering if Arlington County is under any kind of consent decree or enforcement order.
I don't know what the particular adjective or descriptor would be. We have a couple of things we need to do by the end of our permit cycle, and that was made very clear to us. And there's enough flexibility in our permit that we believe we can meet those requirements by the end of our cycle, even though the resources that we're requesting probably won't be in place till just before that time. So it really won't be to our next permit that we'll get in depth in some of these requirements. But we feel like, we were told you need to get these things in place before the end of your cycle. And so it's really at that time, I think, that if there is still a deficiency or a problem, that time being the end of our permit cycle, that we might hear some of these other terms being thrown around. But as it stands now, it's sort of you're on notice to deal with these things before your permit expires.
And I think particularly right now, the Phase 2 communities under the regulations have 5 years to get their program up and running. And of course, Jason's a Phase 1 community, so he's in a little different situation, but it's worth pointing out for the many Phase 2 communities out there that they do have 5 years to get their programs fully up and running. And so that time frame would expire approximately in 2008 or whenever your permit was issued, 5 years after when your permit was issued the first time. So we wouldn't expect to see for Phase 2 communities those kinds of enforcement orders, or that at this point everything would be in the sort of helpful mode right now. Let's move on. John Tinger is playing cleanup here. And so, John, do you want to take it away?
Thank you, Nikos. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about our experience in Region 9 with program evaluations. Within Region 9, we did about 40 audits covering over 140 programs. They were conducted in each of the states within the region, all of which have primacy. So some of the audits were done with the state as a lead and EPA as the contract manager, and others were done under the direct authority of EPA. Most of these have been full audits, although some have been what we call targeted or mini audits, where we look at multiple permittees for one particular program element, such as construction or new development standards. Almost all have been done with Tetra Tech support, and I do want to put in a plug for our website, which is listed here, where you can view all of the evaluations that were done, as well as some summary reports that Tetra Tech did for the state of California on the results of the MS4 program evaluations, as well as on the industrial inspections that were done within the state. As you might imagine, the programs that have been evaluated here have included a wide variety of geography, program types, and aquatic resources that have varied from desert communities to the beaches of Southern California, and included unique resources such as Lake Tahoe and salmon spawning areas. And I guess a main point that I'd like to make from this is that the guidance manual that's been done is really applicable to all programs and all program types. The guidance is a very good summary of a lot of the lessons learned within Region 9, but it also is helpful to take a look at some of the reports on our website if you'd like to peruse those. I think you'll find really two key aspects of that, and that one is that the MS4 programs have many unique aspects. There's a lot of different water quality resources, There's a lot of organizational structures. Some of the permittees operate very individually, while other permittees may operate with other covert permittees or as an umbrella organization with a flood control district or a water management district. And there's a lot of different challenges that every single program faces, and the attitudes are often very different in terms of how to address the stormwater program. I think one of the things that was somewhat interesting for me is it may not be intuitive as to who has the better programs. For me, I would have thought that programs that were more closely related to aquatic resources, such as the beaches, would have generally progressively better programs than programs evaluated in the desert, which may not have the same level of consciousness of water programs. But in fact, we're not necessarily seeing that, and some of the best programs we've seen have been located in desert communities. So I think the other thing you'll see is that there's a lot of similarities, even though there's a lot of unique aspects of the different programs. There's also some very similar and consistent elements that we find for both well-run programs as well as common deficiencies. And I would add a little bit of a caveat to the common deficiencies and common elements of well-run programs in the audit guide, that they do that they do generally apply, but as an auditor we have to keep an open mind as to what works for any particular program. An example is, one very common finding that we found is for municipal and construction and industrial inspectors. Typically where the inspectors come out of the pretreatment program or our erosion and sediment control programs are conduct very good inspections, are very knowledgeable about the stormwater program. But what doesn't work is where the inspections, where a permittee includes inspections on construction sites by plumbers or electricians or people who may not necessarily have knowledge of stormwater. And so if we see that when we do our pre-audit, there may be some red flags in that. And one of the recent audits that we did, the stormwater construction inspections were actually done by the air quality control folks. And for me, that was a real red flag based on our past experience, that what do air quality control inspectors have knowledge of stormwater? But when we got out there, we actually found that the air inspectors were extremely knowledgeable about stormwater programs and actually did a very good job with stormwater. So just as a caveat as you're looking through the guidance, that these are generalities that often are true, but that one has to keep an open mind when looking at these facilities. Just to point out that there is a need for a comprehensive evaluation. One of the things that I think we found is that annual reports alone may not be a good indication of compliance. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is that it may be difficult to sort through the data that's provided in an annual report. Another is that the person writing the report may have difficulty or may have a different understanding of the program than the people who are actually implementing the program. And sometimes things on paper may not translate well into the field. And interestingly enough, we're seeing that this runs both ways. There have been a number of audits where we found elements that a municipality is doing that have a direct benefit on the stormwater program that may not be adequately reflected into the annual reports. So we've actually found things that we've recommended be included in the annual report in order to take credit for that in the stormwater benefits.
Yeah, John, this is John Koska. Can I just add something on the annual reports? The audit also provides additional information that they may not be providing necessarily in the annual reports. And one great example of that we saw a while ago is we did an audit of a city that said they were doing 100 industrial inspections per year, which, on the face of it may sound good. You can't really tell. But then doing the audit, we found out that they had over 5,000 industrial facilities within their city. So you do the math and figure out it's going to take them 50 years to visit each of those just once. Now, maybe they're not doing enough inspections then, but you can't really, in the annual report, they didn't give us enough information to really make that assessment.
Thanks, John. Yeah, and that goes to the complexity of the programs and understanding the complexities of the programs, which often can really only be done in the field. One component of that would be follow-through as well, and the ability to directly ask follow-up questions right there. For example, an annual report may say that training is done once per year. Okay, well that's great. Can I see what the materials are? How is the training working? Have any changes been made to the training operations? Then when you're in the field, you can ask the field inspectors, well, what kind of training have you had? Has it worked? And you can follow through the entire cycle of what's working and what isn't. And again, also to capitalize on something Jenny had said earlier is just because, for example, a program doesn't have necessarily a formalized training program doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have a good program. And I think we've seen examples in one case where the municipality did not have a formalized training program for construction inspectors. However, when we got out into the field, the municipality had 2 dedicated erosion and control inspectors. They've been with the program for years. They were extremely knowledgeable about the program. The program itself was working very well. There may not have been a direct need for a formalized training procedure. So it's important to see the program in its entire context when doing an evaluation. The other part of that is the field component, and it's how important it is to see how things are actually done in the field, how they're actually done on the ground. And just one point to make in terms of doing an audit, it's great to start out with the municipal maintenance yard. Looking through some of the questions that have been answered today, what is a common deficiency? And I think we've seen extremely common that the municipal maintenance yards tend to have problems. So that's a good place to start if you don't have a whole lot of time. I'll talk a little bit about some of the outcomes of the program evaluations. I know we've spoken at length about this, the goals, the benefits, and the outcomes of the audit, so I don't want to repeat, but I do want to go through just a few of what our experience have been in terms of recognizing positive attributes of the program, improving permits, assessing program effectiveness, doing compliance assistant, and also looking at potential permit violations. Recognition. Many of the programs that we've seen have had very little feedback, and I think Jason mentioned that as well, that they've been operating for 7 years and maybe didn't have good feedback from the regulators. I think it's important that when we're doing an audit that we recognize the difficulty of the program and the difficulty of operating this. I mean, it's generally a thankless job in terms of both getting resources as well as, doing things like getting parks and recreational staff to properly dispose of their paint. And it's really important that when auditors are on site, it raises the level of awareness of the entire municipality. When we're on site, we'll typically talk to dozens of people that can range between the directors to management to the guys in the field operating the vac truck. So there's a general increase in awareness of the whole program. And also it's important that we document exceptional and innovative programs, of which we've seen a number of, and I think we had already spoken about the case studies that were involved, as well as awards programs that can increase that recognition. Second part is improving permits, and I should mention that I'm actually in the permitting section of Region 9. We have, for most operations, our permitting is separate from our compliance and enforcement group, but in this one instance we generally work together to do the evaluations, which I think has been very beneficial to the program. And we have identified both missing requirements and unclear language in permits, which upon the next permit cycle we would do a recommendation that be improved. There's also the continuous question of flexibility versus a prescriptive approach. As a permit writer, one of the things that I'm looking at in the field is where a permit has afforded flexibility to a permittee. Has the permittee in fact used that flexibility to establish priorities, to look at what their own goals of the program are? Or is it the case where they've interpreted the flexibility to not require action? And in cases where flexibility has been interpreted to not require action, then I think that's where we need to look at the next permit cycle, and instead of opting for a flexible approach, we need to go to a more prescriptive approach. One other thing is to assess program effectiveness. This can be a very difficult challenge to figure out what's working, what isn't working, and what's being done about it. But the MEP standard is a reiterative approach, and one of the things that we need to ask when we're in the field is, well, is this particular action working? Is it not working? Oftentimes, there'll be an example where a municipality may have developed a brochure. Okay, great. Well, what's been done with that brochure? Is it just sitting outside of the director's office? Is it being handed out to targeted audiences? What's being implemented and how is that working? And the guidance document does mention the CASQA, the California Stormwater Quality Association, developed a white paper recently outlining what essentially are 6 levels of program effectiveness. And I do want to mention that CASQA should be coming out with their final document sometime this spring or summer, which I think will be a good assistance to look at the different levels of program effectiveness, and will provide specific examples of how program effectiveness can be looked at. One more thing is compliance assistance. I think Jason talked a little bit about this, and I think his experience has been somewhat typical of many of the programs that we've looked at, that this comprehensive evaluation can be a real opportunity both for the regulators to understand the complexities of the program, as well as to provide recommendations, identify deficiencies, and identify resources or other programs that we may know about that have faced a similar circumstance or similar problems. If you look through the audit reports on our website, a lot of times I think what's tried to be done is, in cases where a deficiency has been identified, to provide some resources of other programs that you may want to contact in order to try and share those resources. I guess the last part about this is permit violations. We do consider these an audit, and when we look at this, it's important to document potential violations. I think I spoke a little bit about this earlier. It's important to say potential violations and not be official formal finding of violations. This gives the permittee a chance to respond to that. There's oftentimes we're in the field for 3 days. Maybe we didn't talk to the right people. Maybe there's some additional information that would support it not being a violation. So I think it's very important that there be a process to decide what may turn into a violation, and then what the next steps may be. Next steps could be an enforcement action, but they could also be establishing a compliance schedule or some other method of achieving compliance. So just in general, the summary of findings in an audit report. The audit report really should list both the positive attributes and should call attention to the positive attributes. Should list recommendations. Recommendations may be things that are not necessarily required by the permit or are not a deficiency, but may help the program to run better. A typical example was a recent program audit we did where we evaluated 2 co-permittees who were located very close to each other. They didn't really share resources. So one of the recommendations we made was, your program may be benefited by establishing some kind of formal coordination with the municipality that's right next to you. So that would be a recommendation. It's not something that's necessary, but it's something that the auditors determine may help the program. And then deficiencies and potential permit violations would probably be the highest threshold. In terms of the outcomes that we've seen, I think the comprehensive evaluations of over 140 programs have significantly increased the awareness of the MS4 program in all of the states in Region 9. We've also had a number of very clear deficiencies that have been identified and have either been corrected or are being in the process of being corrected. And here's just one example of a talk that was done at StormCon by the City of Reno in response to one of our audits, and how they, in their words, rose to the occasion. So I think there's a real benefit to doing these comprehensive audits. And lastly, there's also a need for follow-up and targeted evaluations. There have been a number of targeted evaluations within California, specifically looking at new development controls, because that's been a priority in certain areas. And I think there's also a need to do follow-up inspections to see that deficiencies have been addressed based on the earlier reports. And I guess with that, we have a poll question, which Nikos will lead us through.
Thank you, John. Yes, so we're coming up to the end here. So we have a couple poll questions, and then we're going to answer some more questions from the audience, and then wrap up this webcast for today. But our first poll question here, does your stormwater management plan include measurable goals or some kind of quantifiable metrics that allow you to, in a pretty concrete way, measure your the progress of your program? So again, select the radio button there to the left for the answer that best represents kind of what's going on in your program. And again, I think, John Costco, if you want to elaborate on this, but I think, we're looking for some collection of things in here that are pretty distinct and pretty measurable, right?
Yeah, because one of the things we found doing the audits is it's often very difficult to determine compliance because there isn't anything measurable. There isn't anything that we can quantify and say, yes, you did 5 of these, you met the permit, you implemented your stormwater management program. So EPA's Phase 2 rule really stresses the measurable goal approach and quantifying numbers and activities like that. So through this poll question, we just want to see how many programs are doing that.
All right, so let's take a look and see how people answered this. A whopping 42% say yes, they have good measurable goals for all their program areas. Well, they have them. Okay, yes, Jenny is always a skeptic, says, well, maybe they're not good. Well, send them in to us, and let's see what those look like. Maybe we can put together a list of some really good ones. 36% say yes, but it's sort of spotty throughout their stormwater management program. And 20% are being honest here, and we have not tracked this by your name, so we won't turn this over to any enforcement officers. But some places, obviously, where there could be some improvements made. We have another poll question for you, too, on this one. How often do you evaluate the effectiveness of your stormwater management program? And again, this might not be the formal audit or even a formal self-audit. But generally, we're kind of asking, how often are you kind of taking a look at your program specifically and perhaps modifying or improving your stormwater management plan based on, kind of a sit down and take a little bit of a time to kind of assess where things are and how things are going. So the options here are annually, once every permit term, only when required by the permitting authority, and haven't done it yet. Or never would be the last option. Anything you want to add on that one, John?
Yeah, and again, this is, more, EPA talks about the iterative approach to stormwater, and so you're annually implementing, assessing the effectiveness, making changes and implementing again. So we want to see how often are you kind of doing that iterative approach to stormwater management.
All right, so let's see what people had to say here. Very good. 53% are doing that annually, so that's excellent. 15% say once every permit term. 16%, almost 17% there in the honest category, only when told to do so. And another bunch of honest people saying they haven't done it yet. So again, kind of going back to some of the questions that we heard before, there's obviously some room for improvement, and these are the kinds of things that you might want to think about, at least on an annual basis, to kind of take stock in some regular way of how things are going and what improvements you can make in your program. So we're going to take some questions from the audience for the remaining minutes that we have here, and just tell people too that we might go a minute or two over. We don't have to. Cut off exactly at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. So first of all, there's a question here for John Tinger. So I hope you're still on the line with us. Steve in the city of Salem would like to know what you mean by prescriptive approach. I think you had that on one of your opening slides. And does that have anything to do with numeric standards or numeric limits, John?
Yeah, prescriptive approach. I guess that to a certain extent that would be in the eye of the beholder of what's prescriptive or not. I think how we would look at it, maybe it'd be best if I give an example of a non-prescriptive approach that we've seen in a permit. Maybe for industrial inspections, the permit may say you must develop a prioritized list of industrial facilities, and you must determine a inspection frequency based on that prioritization list. Incredibly flexible area. Where something more prescriptive may be you must conduct inspections of all restaurants once per year. You must conduct inspections of all, a certain category of industrial sites within a certain time frame. And we've seen permits go towards more in that direction as to saying what the specific requirements need to be within a permit. And I guess, no, I don't mean that is tied necessarily to numeric standards.
Right, yeah. And I think we would all agree that, being specific about things does not necessarily mean going that far, but having concrete sort of program goals to go with that. John Tinger, I'm going to start with you on this next question, and then we'll open it up and see what other reactions we have. Michelle says, you've discussed several deficiencies. Can you give examples of any violations or fees? And maybe also let's add to that, because several people have asked this, can you list some of the kind of typical things that you do find?
I actually can't speak real well towards the fines and violations as I'm in the permitting section, but I can talk a little bit about some of the typical deficiencies we found. I'm not sure which area we can talk about. There's a lot of them. I'll start with probably one of the biggest deficiencies that I've seen, and I think we're seeing almost across the board, is the municipal maintenance yards, which very often do not meet the standards required to prevent stormwater pollution. And that's something that's so important because typically it's the permittee that actually is operating the municipal maintenance yard and can really serve as an example to how a maintenance yard should be run.
Yeah, John, this is John Costco. A good example. I'm not aware of a lot of, fines or penalties have been assessed based on these MS4 evaluations, but a good example of how the state addressed problems at the maintenance yard. We started doing audits in San Diego County about 5 years ago, and immediately identified problems at essentially all the maintenance yards we visited. So what the city did is, or what the state did is, there's about 20 co-permittees within the county. We only did audits of 3 of them. They sent a letter out to all 20 and said, basically, we've identified these problems. Everyone needs to make sure that their maintenance yards are, up to shape, not causing any problems. And they were basically placed on notice so that if we found problems in the future, they would then go more directly to some type of NOV or action. And they kind of use as a warning.
So aside from municipal maintenance yards being the one that sticks out, if you thought about, say, the other 6 minimum measures or Phase 1 permit requirements generally and all the audits you guys have done, what other areas sort of pop out for you?
I think one area that definitely pops out is construction inspections, planning. We often see deficiencies there. Also just more in the overall planning aspects. Either programs don't have any type of stormwater management plan at all, or they're not having, as we saw in one of the earlier poll questions, they don't have measurable goals to quantify progress and show their achievements. Those are 2 other often common deficiencies we've seen.
John Tinger, do you want to add?
Sure. In terms of, I guess there's some kind of specific deficiencies that we may see in each of the program elements, but in terms of the overall program element, new development standards is probably one of the most challenging, as I'm sure people are aware of. And we're seeing various levels of actually implementing program development standards, which really range from having absolutely no program for new development standards at all to some programs have very developed standards. So that's one I think that in general we're probably seeing less implementation of.
We have a question here from Diane with the City of Miami, and she's wondering if it's unusual for EPA to conduct an audit of an MS4 program where the state is authorized. And maybe Jenny, you could speak a little bit about how we've been trying to field test this.
Right. I mean, it's always the state with authority having the first prerogative to do it. EPA also has the authority to come in and do it, but generally doesn't do it unless it's in partnership with the state or unless the state just doesn't have the resources or there's some reason to think there's a serious problem. We are trying to get the states now to get out there and start doing more MS4 evaluations, which is one of the purposes of having the guide. And it's out right now. We're calling it our field test version because we really do think that as more evaluations are done, we'll learn a lot more about how to do them. And we want feedback from everybody on how it's working and what we can do to improve this. So to the extent that some of our limited resources might go into assisting a state doing some evaluations, we're willing to try to help figure out how that might work, even if it's just doing some training or something like that.
Very good. And if you'll notice, when you do take a look at this document right on the cover, it says that comments, questions, and things of that nature can be directed to Jenny. So we do want information and feedback and what your experiences have been and that sort of thing. We have another question here from Aaron with the City of Yuba. This is a question that probably the state folks are going to want to really think about too. He wants to know, given that state water regulation and oversight has historically been, our stormwater regulation has been based often on population, phase 1 and phase 2. Have we given some thought in this document or in other places to prioritizing how we might do inspections based on receiving water sensitivity, or maybe other factors that we might consider in setting priorities? And I know there was a couple of comments on there, but anyone want to elaborate on that?
I think that would definitely be a great idea. One of the problems we've seen is, these MS4s obviously are very large. You're talking about, a county or city size government. It's a little easier to target when you're talking about, individual industrial facilities or construction sites. But I think, that is kind of the next step, evolution of this MS4 evaluation is to target more based on water quality, maybe all the MS4s on a TMDL impaired reach or something like that.
Right. I mean, I think we noted earlier that when you're looking at criteria for deciding who to audit, there could be a lot of different reasons, and certainly the water quality issues are one of them.
Okay, let's just take a second here as we're running out of time. We may actually answer one or more questions, but I wanted to remind you that this seminar will be archived, so you can access it today after today's live presentation. The webcast will be posted on our website, the same place where you access today's webcast, and it will be hosted there indefinitely, so staff that couldn't attend today can view this entire presentation. We've also posted the speaker's contact information in case you would like to contact them after today. You can also find a comprehensive resource list by pressing the Resources button on your screen. You'll need Adobe Acrobat to view that document, but there's a number of websites and documents that you might want to look at there. And finally, a webcast evaluation survey will soon appear on your screen. Please consider completing this survey and letting us know your thoughts. We do appreciate feedback as we try to improve our webcasts. If you do not see the evaluation survey on your screen in just a minute or two, please turn off your pop-up blocker. And now we have time for a couple of additional questions. There's one from Christopher here that I think the essence of his question is how would this guide be used for the non-traditional MS4s, the folks like transportation agencies or universities that might be facing some different issues and certainly have different structures and that sort of stuff?
Well, we have used the audit guide to, evaluation guide to evaluate state DOTs, but it is a very different evaluation. I mean, you have to customize the questions, you have to customize your approach. But I think a lot of the same principles can be applied. You want to cover essentially a lot of the same program elements. Obviously, when you're talking about legal authority, you're going to have to ask this different questions. But you still want to do the field inspection components and things like that. But they're another type of MS4, and this evaluation approach can work for them also.
And the last question I think that we'll take today before we conclude this webcast is Mike in Atlanta would like to know, how do we factor in compliance with MEP, maximum extent practicable, with the permit and all of that?
Well, MEP is really a case-by-case sort of judgment, unless your state permitting authority has somewhere defined MEP, but actually that's not really commonly the case. So, the answer to that question is not something that I can, give you a prescriptive answer to, because it really needs to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. At this time, I'd like to conclude today's webcast. Thank you, Jenny, John, Jason, and John, two Johns, for presenting today. And, of course, thanks to the audience for sticking with us. Our next webcast will be on May 9th. Nancy Lee, a nationally noted expert on communications and social marketing, will join us for what will be, I promise you, a very lively discussion about how we can use social marketing techniques in the stormwater education and outreach programs, and thereby try to help change citizens' behavior and prevent stormwater pollution. More information on the May 9th webcast and registration will be posted on EPA's NPDES training courses and workshops webpage. That website is www.epa.gov/NPDES/training. That ends our webcast for today. Thank you very much.